Have you ever felt trapped by an invisible wall, one that keeps you from becoming who you really want to be, pulling you back to familiar patterns and fears? Carl Jung called this your psychological prison, built from childhood wounds, societal expectations, and unprocessed shadows. It's like being in a room where the walls are made of your deepest insecurities, yet so transparent you barely notice them. In the next 15 minutes, I'll walk you through how these mental barriers formed around your mind and, more importantly, how to break them down for good. You'll discover practical tools to dismantle these walls, not quick fixes, but keys you've always had within you. The invisible architecture of your mental prison. What if the walls that confine you aren't made of concrete and steel, but of thoughts and beliefs? The most powerful prisons are the ones we can't see, the ones built within our own minds. While we easily recognize physical barriers, the psychological structures limiting your potential operate invisibly, shaping your choices without your awareness. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist whose insights revolutionized our understanding of the human psyche, discovered something profound about these mental prisons. Unlike Freud, who focused primarily on repressed desires, Jung recognized that our minds contain vast territories beyond our conscious awareness. Territories that silently govern our behavior, restrict our possibilities, and define the boundaries of what we believe possible. These psychological prisons are sophisticated architectural structures built within your psyche, complete with walls, guards, and locks. Picture your mind as a house with hidden rooms and passageways you've forgotten exist. You were the architect, though you likely don't remember designing the blueprint. Each limiting belief forms another wall, another locked door in this mental building you inhabit daily. Think about how often you've stopped yourself from pursuing something meaningful with thoughts like, "People like me don't do things like that," or "I'm not the type of person who could ever." These aren't casual observations. They're the sound of you bumping against the walls of your mental prison. What makes these constraints so powerful is their invisibility. You can't challenge what you don't perceive. Most people live their entire lives without questioning these boundaries because they mistake them for reality itself. Jung understood that the psyche isn't a simple, unified entity, but a complex interaction between conscious and unconscious elements. Your conscious mind, the thoughts you're aware of having, represents only a small fraction of your total mental activity. Beneath this thin surface lies the vast unconscious, containing everything from repressed memories to creative potential you've never accessed. 7. More fascinating still is what Jung called the collective unconscious, a deeper layer of the unconscious mind shared among all humans, containing universal symbolic patterns he termed archetypes. These inherited psychological structures influence how we perceive the world, sometimes reinforcing our limitations by connecting them to collective human fears. This creates an extraordinary paradox. We are simultaneously the prisoner and the prison builder. You constructed the very walls that now limit you. Your mind generated the rules, erected the barriers, and now enforces the limitations you unknowingly created. Until you make the unconscious conscious, Jung wrote, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. This powerful insight reveals our predicament. What we don't recognize controls us. The true nature of these mental constructs forms from three primary sources. First, childhood experiences that taught you what's safe, possible, and forbidden. Second, collective unconscious patterns inherited from human evolutionary and cultural history. Third, unprocessed shadow material, the parts of yourself you've rejected or never integrated into your conscious identity. These three elements form a coherent system, a psychological architecture that feels so natural you mistake it for reality. The most insidious aspect is how it conceals its own existence. You don't feel imprisoned. You simply feel like you're making reasonable choices based on who you really are. What would happen if you could suddenly see these walls? What if you recognized that many limitations you've accepted as truth are actually constructed barriers you can question? When Jung worked with patients, he observed something remarkable. As they became aware of their unconscious content through dreams, active imagination, and analysis, they experienced profound shifts in their sense of possibility. What seemed fixed and permanent revealed itself as fluid and changeable. The walls became visible, and once visible, they could be addressed. This process of illuminating your invisible prison is what Jung called individuation, the journey towards psychological wholeness, by integrating conscious and unconscious aspects of the psyche. It's about consciously choosing which structures serve your authentic development rather than blindly accepting limitations installed by past experiences or less aware versions of yourself. The four walls, how your prison was built. Think about the architects of your mental prison. The limitations installed by others aren't random accidents. They're architectural elements with specific blueprints and builders. These patterns of thought that consistently pull you back from the edge of growth originate from a construction crew. Childhood experiences, family systems, cultural expectations, and personal traumas that quietly work together to build walls so familiar you mistake them for your own identity. Your psychological confines began taking shape long before you had any say in the matter. From your earliest moments, experiences created the foundation of your limitations. As a child, you absorbed messages about what was acceptable, dangerous, and possible for someone like you. Your parents or caregivers, acting from their own conditioned beliefs, taught you which attitudes and behaviors would be rewarded or punished. This emotional conditioning happens through imprinting, where experiences during sensitive developmental periods leave lasting impressions on your psyche. Consider a child whose artwork receives consistent criticism instead of encouragement. That child develops a lasting belief that self-expression is dangerous or worthless, pouring the foundation of their mental prison. As this foundation hardens, your parents' voices become internalized as your inner critic, a constant internal commentary system monitoring your every move. That voice saying, "You'll never amount to anything," or "Don't embarrass yourself by trying," isn't actually yours. It's an echo of authorities from your past, now given permanent residence in your mind. The inner critic actively polices the boundaries of what you believe is possible, keeping you safely within your psychological prison. Beyond your family circle, the walls of your prison rise higher through broader influences. You absorbed messages from your community, education system, religious institutions, and culture about what constitutes success, what people of your background should aspire to, and what limitations you should accept without question. These collective beliefs become another layer of restriction, often so normalized that questioning them feels almost unnatural. Think about how many life choices you've made, not because they reflected your authentic desires, but because they aligned with cultural expectations. This demonstrates how effectively external expectations become internalized limitations. Jung recognized that we learn to conform early in life, often abandoning our authentic potential for social acceptance. Perhaps the most complex building materials in your psychological prison come from trauma. When events overwhelm your capacity to cope, your psyche creates protective barriers, defense mechanisms designed to shield you from harm. A child who experiences betrayal might develop a barrier against trust. Someone humiliated publicly might construct walls against visibility or vulnerability. These trauma responses once served a vital protective function. The problem isn't that they existed, it's that they outlived their usefulness. The barriers that protected you at age 7 become the restrictions that confine you at 37. Jung observed that early experiences of abandonment, betrayal, and emotional trauma often lead individuals to retreat into a self-protective inner world that ultimately becomes a prison of isolation. What makes these psychological constructs so powerful is their interconnected nature. Your childhood experiences shaped how you interpreted cultural messages. Your traumatic experiences filtered which parental voices you internalized most deeply. The psychological complexes that formed were influenced by both personal history and the inherited archetypal patterns from the collective unconscious that Jung described. The resulting structure is remarkably stable because each wall supports the others. Your inner critic justifies your trauma responses. Your cultural conditioning validates your inner critic. Your trauma responses make your cultural limitations feel necessary for survival. It's an integrated system of confinement, not just random limitations. The 4 psychological barriers keeping you trapped. Your mental prison isn't just a passive structure, it has an active security system. Inside your mind, 4 powerful guardians patrol the boundaries of what you believe is possible, each using different tactics to keep you confined. What's most disturbing isn't their existence, but how they've convinced you they're protecting rather than imprisoning you. These psychological barriers are sophisticated mechanisms designed to maintain the walls of your confinement even when you consciously try to break free. They function as an internal security system that activates whenever you approach the edges of your comfort zone. The first guardian is the fear of inadequacy, a persistent sense that you're fundamentally not enough. Think of it as an internal critic who sits at your mental doorway. This deeply embedded belief system creates a constant background hum of unworthiness. When you consider pursuing something meaningful, this guardian immediately reminds you of all the reasons you can't possibly succeed. It convinces you that failure would confirm what you've secretly suspected all along, that you're inherently deficient. This fear keeps you trapped by making the pain of remaining confined feel less acute than the anticipated pain of trying and proving your inadequacy. The second guardian is societal conditioning transformed into internal law. This guardian works like an invisible rulebook you carry everywhere. These aren't recognized as external rules. They've become your own voice. Think about the times you've stopped yourself from speaking up, taking a creative risk, or pursuing an unconventional path. Often, the barrier wasn't external disapproval, but an internalized belief that people like me don't do things like that. These deeply encoded rules feel as real and immutable as physical laws. The conditioning is most powerful when you can't even identify its source. You simply know what is and isn't possible for someone in your position. The third guardian is your unprocessed shadow. This shadow operates like a projector, casting onto others what you can't see in yourself. It contains not only your negative qualities, but often your greatest potential and power. When you approach genuine transformation, this guardian activates by projecting your disowned qualities onto others. You find yourself inexplicably irritated by confident people if you've disowned your own confidence, or judgmental of others' ambition if you've repressed your own. The shadow creates a distorted social reality that reinforces your limitations. The fourth guardian is habitual self-sabotage, the automatic behaviors that activate precisely when you're closest to breaking free. Like a safety alarm that triggers right before escape, these specific patterns maintain psychological equilibrium. Research shows that self-handicapping is a cognitive strategy where you create obstacles that provide ready-made excuses for potential failure. You might procrastinate on important projects, create unnecessary conflict before significant opportunities, or subtly undermine your own efforts. These are sophisticated psychological defenses, protecting you from the anxiety of potential success and the responsibility it brings. What makes these four guardians so effective is how they operate together as a coordinated system. Your fear of inadequacy triggers self-sabotage behaviors. Your shadow projections reinforce your societal conditioning. Your self-sabotage patterns confirm your fears of inadequacy. Together, they create an integrated security system with redundancies and backup mechanisms. The key insight is understanding they originally formed as protection. Your fear of inadequacy once protected you from rejection. Your societal conditioning shielded you from ostracism. Your shadow protected your fragile self-concept. Your self-sabotage guarded you from disappointment and the anxiety of change. These psychological barriers create cognitive distortions that get projected onto your entire social environment. You don't just feel inadequate, you construct a world where inadequacy seems objectively real. You perceive a limited world because your prison extends beyond your mind into how you construct reality. The paradox is that you cannot simply fight or eliminate these guardians. Direct confrontation only strengthens them. Instead, the path to freedom begins with a radical shift, recognizing them, understanding their protective intent, and gradually integrating what they've been guarding. This doesn't mean accepting limitations, but transforming them through awareness. Imposter syndrome, the perfect prison guard. What if your greatest accomplishments only make you feel more like a fraud? Unlike the other psychological barriers that simply block progress, imposter syndrome creates a particularly devastating trap. The more you achieve, the stronger its grip becomes, transforming what should be victories into new forms of imprisonment. Picture a CEO who just closed a major deal, sitting alone in her office, convinced it was just luck. Or imagine a doctor who graduated top of his class, sweating through each diagnosis, certain he's about to be exposed as unqualified. This is imposter syndrome at work. It follows you into your achievements, whispering that you don't deserve to be there. While other barriers keep you confined within limitations, imposter syndrome poisons your moments of triumph, turning them into anxiety-filled experiences where you're constantly waiting to be found out. The true insidiousness of imposter syndrome lies in its paradoxical nature. Each time you overcome a challenge or reach a milestone instead of building confidence, it creates a heavier burden of perceived fraudulence. You think, if they really knew how little I understand, or I just got lucky this time. The greater your success, the more you feel like an imposter who has somehow fooled everyone. Researchers have identified 5 distinct manifestations of this syndrome. The perfectionist believes anything less than flawless performance proves their inadequacy. They set impossible standards, then use inevitable shortfalls as evidence they don't belong. The expert feels they should know everything before claiming competence, constantly seeking more information, yet never feeling qualified enough. The natural genius believes true ability means mastering skills effortlessly on the first try. Any struggle confirms they're imposters. The soloist feels asking for help reveals their incompetence. Finally, the superhuman drives themselves to excel in every life domain. Believing anything less confirms their fraudulence. What makes imposter syndrome particularly effective as a prison guard is how it operates beneath conscious awareness. Unlike a fear of failure that you can readily identify, imposter feelings disguise themselves as rational self-assessment. I'm just being realistic about my abilities, you tell yourself, not recognizing that your realism systematically discounts every achievement while magnifying every flaw. Research published in the International Journal of Behavioral Science reveals that up to 82% of people experience imposter feelings, regardless of their objective accomplishments or expertise. I'm just being realistic about my abilities becomes the common refrain across all levels, from students to CEOs, Nobel laureates to renowned artists. The more accomplished the individual, often the more privately tortured they are by feelings of fraudulence. Imposter syndrome creates an unquenchable thirst for external validation. You might think one more degree, one more promotion, or one more award would finally convince you of your legitimacy, but that's precisely the trap. Each validation becomes immediately discounted. They didn't see the mistakes. The competition must have been weak. I fooled them again. No amount of external recognition can satisfy the internal doubt. The most profound insight about imposter syndrome comes from examining it through a Jungian lens. Far from being merely a cognitive distortion, it serves a specific psychological purpose. It guards the threshold between your comfortable but limited identity and your authentic but uncertain potential. When you step into greater achievement or recognition, you're changing who you are becoming. This identity shift triggers profound anxiety. The syndrome protects you from this anxiety in a perverse way. By maintaining the belief that you don't truly belong in your new role, you avoid having to fully inhabit the new identity with all its demands and responsibilities. "I'm not really this successful person" becomes a psychological escape hatch, allowing you to dip your toe in greater waters without committing to the full transformation. This explains why the syndrome intensifies precisely when you're growing most rapidly. It's protecting you from the internal discomfort of genuine transformation. Each achievement carries the potential to reshape your self-concept, and imposter syndrome keeps that threatening process at bay by maintaining the fiction that your achievements aren't really yours. Shadow work, the key to unlocking your mental prison. The walls of your mental prison aren't built from what you know about yourself, but from what you've refused to see. Think about it. Every time you say, "That's not me," or "I would never," you're adding another brick to your confinement. These rejected parts of yourself don't simply disappear when you disown them. Instead, they shape your life from beneath your awareness, influencing your choices, relationships, and self-perception without your consent. What would happen if, instead of fighting against these shadows, you turned toward them with genuine curiosity? This is exactly what Jung discovered when he pioneered the concept of shadow work, a process that involves bringing the unconscious aspects of your psyche into conscious awareness. Shadow work represents a fundamental shift in how you relate to yourself. Rather than trying to eliminate your flaws or overcome your weaknesses, it invites you to recognize that these rejected parts contain valuable information and untapped energy. The parts you've denied access to consciousness haven't disappeared. They've gone underground, operating without your awareness. This work is challenging precisely because it requires facing what you've spent a lifetime avoiding. We build elaborate defense mechanisms to keep these disowned parts at bay. Think about someone who triggers inexplicable anger in you. That intense reaction often points to something within yourself that you've rejected so completely that seeing it in others becomes unbearable. This psychological mechanism, projection, serves as a mirror, reflecting back the very qualities you've banished from your conscious identity. The shadow isn't inherently negative. It contains not only your unacknowledged flaws, but also your unrealized strengths and potential. That's the paradox Jung uncovered. The very aspects of yourself that you've rejected often hold exactly what you need to become whole. The ambition you've labeled as selfish, the anger you've deemed inappropriate, the vulnerability you've marked as weakness. These disowned energies, when integrated consciously, can become sources of authentic power. Shadow work offers several practical pathways to self-discovery, each providing unique access to your unconscious material. Through journaling, you can create a dialogue with your resistance. When you feel blocked from growth, write a conversation between your conscious self and the resistance itself. Ask directly, "What are you trying to protect me from?" Then write the response without censoring. This technique, which Jung called active imagination, bypasses your rational mind to access deeper awareness. Your dreams offer another window to shadow material. The figures that appear, particularly those that feel threatening, often embody aspects of your shadow. Instead of dismissing disturbing dreams, approach them with curiosity. What qualities does this dream figure possess? How might those qualities serve your growth if consciously integrated? creative expression provides yet another avenue. Through painting, movement, or music, you can explore unconscious content without rational filters. The goal isn't artistic excellence, but authentic expression, allowing whatever emerges to teach you about yourself. Your relationships reveal shadow material most directly. When someone provokes an intense emotional reaction, ask yourself, is there any way that I express this same quality? This isn't about blame, but about reclaiming the projected parts of yourself. Remember that the goal of shadow work isn't to eliminate these aspects, but to bring them into relationship with your conscious mind. Integration doesn't mean these qualities disappear. It means they no longer control you from the shadows. You gain the ability to choose when and how to express these energies, rather than having them erupt unconsciously. The most powerful shadow work technique combines all these approaches into a single question. What am I resisting, and what would happen if I moved beyond that resistance? By creating a dialogue with your barriers, you can uncover what they're protecting and what possibilities might emerge when you expand beyond them. Breaking free. Tools for psychological liberation. That dialogue with your barriers reveals something crucial. The prison doors have always been unlocked. But why do we still feel trapped even after this realization? The answer lies not in pushing harder against the walls, but in developing specific psychological capacities that transform how you relate to the barriers themselves. Before diving into solutions, let me clarify the core message. Transforming your relationship with barriers requires specialized psychological tools that change how you perceive and interact with limitations. Willpower alone will never dismantle your mental prison. Think about it. Have you ever tried to force yourself to stop feeling anxious? To simply choose to be confident? These approaches typically fail because they're like trying to tear down steel-reinforced walls with your bare hands. Here are 4 powerful tools designed specifically for psychological liberation. 1. Narrative reframing. This technique recognizes that the stories we tell ourselves shape our entire reality. When you encounter a limitation, you're living within a narrative you've constructed about that barrier. For example, instead of seeing yourself as someone who always fails, you might reframe this as someone who has encountered challenges while developing their skills. This isn't mere positive thinking. It's about viewing your life story from a more empowering angle, becoming the author rather than a trapped character. Psychological flexibility. This is the ability to be fully present with difficult thoughts while still moving toward what matters to you. Central to acceptance and commitment therapy, psychological flexibility involves 6 core processes that counter rigid patterns. When that inner critic says, "I'm not good enough," flexibility teaches you to respond with, "I notice I'm having the thought that I'm not good enough." This subtle shift creates space between you and the thought, allowing you to choose your response rather than being controlled by it. Conscious vulnerability. Most people spend their lives armoring themselves against inadequacy. But what if the very act of protecting yourself is what keeps you imprisoned? Conscious vulnerability involves intentionally lowering your defenses and allowing yourself to be seen, imperfections and all. By acknowledging your humanity, sharing uncertainties or genuine feelings, you create bridges rather than walls. Your doubts and fears become points of connection rather than sources of shame. 4. Persona work. Jung viewed the persona as the social mask we wear to make specific impressions. We all develop these masks: the professional self, the parental self, the social self. Persona work involves becoming conscious of these different masks. Which ones have you worn for so long that you've forgotten their masks? Through this work, you learn to choose your personas consciously rather than compulsively, wearing them as tools for specific contexts rather than prisons that define your entire identity. Self-compassion forms the foundation for all these tools. Rather than criticizing yourself for having psychological barriers in the first place, you learn to treat yourself with the same kindness you would offer a struggling friend. This doesn't mean avoiding growth. Quite the opposite. Self-compassion creates the safe internal environment needed for genuine transformation. Together, these tools fundamentally alter your relationship with your own mind. You move from being a prisoner of your past conditioning to becoming the architect of your future self. The journey beyond your mental prison, as you transform from prisoner to architect, an entirely new landscape emerges before you, one where the walls that once confined you become foundations for something greater. Having broken free from self-limiting beliefs and confronted your shadows, you now stand at the threshold of genuine psychological freedom. The world beyond your psychological prison isn't what most imagine. It's not a place of perfect happiness or the absence of challenge, but rather a state of profound presence and choice. The journey doesn't end when you recognize your barriers. That's merely the beginning of a lifelong process psychologists call psychological freedom. This freedom isn't a final destination where you arrive and permanently reside. Instead, it's an ongoing practice of awareness, choice, and growth that unfolds day by day. Each time you catch yourself slipping back into old patterns, noticing when your inner critic starts its familiar monologue, or when you begin to doubt your capabilities, you strengthen your capacity for psychological freedom through the simple act of conscious recognition. What Jung termed individuation represents this evolutionary process of becoming your authentic self. Far more than self-improvement, individuation involves the gradual integration of all aspects of your psyche, the light and the shadow, the conscious and unconscious. It's about becoming whole rather than perfect. The integrated individual doesn't eliminate their weaknesses. Instead, they develop a relationship with every part of themselves, recognizing how each element contributes to the complete tapestry of who they are. When you begin living beyond your mental prison, creativity flows more naturally. Not just artistic creativity, but the ability to generate novel solutions to life's challenges. Think about how much mental energy was previously consumed by maintaining your defenses. As these psychological burdens lighten, that energy becomes available for innovation and genuine expression. You'll likely discover talents that were previously overshadowed by fear and self-doubt. Your relationships transform as well. When you're no longer operating from a place of psychological confinement, you stop using others as mirrors to validate your worth. You begin to see people as they truly are, rather than as characters fulfilling roles in your internal drama. This shift creates the foundation for authentic connection, relationships based on mutual recognition rather than mutual illusion. Consider these examples of transformation. One woman described her experience like this: "I used to believe I needed to earn my right to exist by achieving constantly. Now, I recognize that was just a story I inherited. I still accomplish things, but from a completely different internal place, one of choice rather than desperate need. The difference isn't visible from the outside, but it's everything to me." Another powerful illustration comes from a man who spent decades avoiding conflict. "I discovered my fear of disagreement wasn't protecting my relationships. It was preventing real intimacy. Learning to express myself honestly, even when it creates tension, has actually strengthened my connections with others, rather than damaging them as I'd feared." The key to maintaining psychological freedom lies in creating practices that reinforce your awareness. These might include regular reflection, ongoing shadow work, or surrounding yourself with people who support your authentic expression. Most importantly, it requires self-compassion during the inevitable moments when you slip back into old patterns. The ultimate revelation about psychological freedom isn't that you need to eliminate all barriers, but that you develop the awareness to distinguish between the walls that protect you and those that confine you. Some boundaries are necessary and healthy. They define your values and protect your energy. Others are remnants of outdated defensive strategies that no longer serve you. Discernment, not demolition, becomes your practice. As we conclude our journey, Jung's insight reveals the paradox of liberation. The experience of the self is always a defeat for the ego, but through this defeat, true transformation becomes possible. Breaking free requires recognizing that the walls confining you were self-constructed as protection, but have become your limitation. The path to psychological freedom isn't about destroying these boundaries entirely, but discerning which serve your growth and which must be transcended. Those who engage in this integration process discover not just self-awareness, but genuine emotional resilience. What awaits isn't a perfect life, but an authentic one. The door has always been unlocked. What's stopping you from stepping through today and embracing the person you were meant to become?